Okay, so the first question that people ask me is, what is 5G? What are small cells and what are you talking about? Why are people concerned? Concern is actually not the right word, but why are people opposed to 5Gs and what 5G brings? So what I'm showing you today is on one side, a picture sent to me, and we're sent pictures like this all the time. These are two separate locations, by the way, in looking at the pictures. This is a person who had a small cell installed. They lived in an apartment and they sent me the picture and said, you know, I don't know what this is about. I don't know much about this issue, but tell me what you know about the research and should I be worried about this? What should I do? So that's their window facing the antennas of the quote unquote small cell. Then on the other side is a picture sent to me from someone in Ohio about that shows a small cell there in a residential area. And a small cell is really an industry created term for a shorter cell tower. And you can see the antenna and the equipment boxes. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. I found this picture when I was on Google Maps from Cleveland. And here you have, again, the equipment box and these very tall poles, and then the antenna at the top. Sometimes they have, you know, lights or security cameras or other kind of equipment on these poles because they're so high. And in fact, once you have a wireless facility that has all the electricity and a very strong pole which can hold a lot of weight, it's not that hard to add other types of technology on it, such as, for example, cameras and other things. 5G it really is about millions of new wireless devices and applications. It's not just about having your phone do all kinds of fancy new things. It's actually going to be machine-to-machine communication and a wide variety of applications, even in agriculture, actually. One of my webinars, which I did, I talk about how there are all of these cows that are being equipped with monitors with 5G to know when they milk or where they are, where they're going, locator, cameras, all kinds of ideas are being churned around. And we would say, I mean, I do have an opinion, and that is that 5G is just not ready for the public, and here's why. So a few things to know. 4G is the backbone for 5G. You put up the 4G infrastructure, and 5G is going to be working in tandem with 4G, at least certainly for the near future. That means that there'll be a densification of 4G antennas and 5G antennas, and your phone will be able to go between 4G and 5G, depending on what services in the area and what applications you have. So it's adding more on top of what we have, much more in terms of 4G. And 5G is going to use the current frequencies that we have now, as well as higher frequencies, millimeter waves and submillimeter waves. In fact, the FCC is already looking at terahertz waves for 7G, and I can send you that article. So they're moving up into higher frequencies that have never been used for the public before. They'll be mounted on utility poles, street lights, and buildings. And if there's a street light, it will go up higher generally, and utility poles will then go up higher. A lot of times, in order to hold the equipment, there's going to be a replacement pole, a stronger pole, bigger, wider pole, which is put in to hold the equipment. Now, once you get 4G, it is not that hard to switch or to add on a 5G antenna, to swap it out. And I actually have a video of companies showing just how easy it is. Once you have the electricity, once you have the equipment boxes. In several states, about half of the United States, there are streamlining bills which are stripping local authorities of the decision-making in the process of what local authority can say or not say related to where these go. The FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, is also and has put forward regulations which have taken away local authority in terms of what they can do in terms of costs, charging rents, shot clocks, and otherwise. And actually there are lawsuits, several lawsuits moving forward related to that. Our organization is actually involved in a lawsuit, and what we're involved in, a legal appeal, is that the Federal Communications Commission has outdated regulations on the allowable limits for the radiation, the non-ionizing radiation that these antennas emit. And just in December, they decided to close a decision-making process where they decided they didn't need to update the 24-year-old limits about how much radiation we're allowed to be exposed to from cell tower radiation. We are contending that they didn't adequately review the record because there was so much research, so many scientists saying that these FCC limits needed to be updated to reflect the latest research. There's also property values, the issues related to energy use, because there's actually going to be overall, if you add up that we're going to have, it's estimated 800,000 new wireless facilities in the United States. All of that is going to be adding to our energy consumption. Now, the individual pieces of equipment are, of course, more, and everything is getting more energy efficient, but it does not make up for the amount of new devices and actual towers that are being put in. So there's been several studies that have looked at that and found that energy goals are not being met, and that there are just so many things that it can't make up for how much energy is being used. And it is a fact that 5G deployment and the 4G densification that comes along with it will be increasing the environmental levels of non-ionizing radiofrequency radiation. So I have one picture which is from California and one from Chicago. I'm from Ohio here. On the right side, you can see an equipment box, and there's a smart meter often that is on. This is like the anatomy of a small cell. You'll have the equipment box, the smart meter, and on the other side, the transmitting antennas at the top. Industry says it's as small as a pizza box, but actually that's really not the case, because the entire thing is most definitely not as small as a pizza box, and certainly the equipment box is not. In our community, we had a proposal, and it was 29 cubic feet was going to be the allowable footage for this equipment box. And of course, you're going to have the increased height. And by the way, when you have a small cell or a cell tower, it could even go up higher by law with very little public process, if any at all, because of regulations that are being put in place. And you can see that again here in this picture from Ohio. You see the equipment that's on this. And this equipment can be quite heavy. Issue that's being raised, a health and safety issue, has to do with how heavy that equipment is, because if a car goes into it, it just adds another piece of hazard to this tall thing, which can be knocked over or dented or hurt. Also, if it falls over, and there are cases of that, and I wish I'd had a picture for you here today of small cells which have fallen over. How do you turn off that antenna? Let's say, how do you make sure that it's safe for people to come and address it? What if there's a car or a person or someone who's been injured, or you're just walking by, walking your dog? That small cell, that cell antenna will be on the ground. And how do we know if it's transmitting or not? This is my community, and I wanted to show it to you because I don't have this for cities in Ohio, but you can see this is a proposal from a few years ago, and so many people were opposed to this proposal that it has been tabled. Actually, it's been years now, and if you look up Montgomery County small cell or Montgomery County 5G, you can stay up to date with what's happening in this neighborhood. But you can see that these proposed sites are throughout neighborhoods. And if you don't have it now, I'm pretty sure that it's coming your way in time. Maybe not this year, but definitely next year. That is the plan. And I told you that there are 800,000 new estimated small cells in the United States. That was the FCC putting forward that number. And a few things that are happening. There are, at every level of government, at the local, state, and federal, actions to streamline, and those include exempting the public from input or public hearings and from environmental reviews. Now, that was struck down by the FCC, that it didn't have to go through, the FCC passed a regulation that there didn't have to follow the NEPA. However, that was a court determined that they could not move forward with that. However, when sites are going up, they're just being, check marked off as not needing to have to go through environmental review, not meeting criteria to have a deeper look at the environmental process, without consideration of the fact that in a community you might have 30 or 40 installations. Well, what does that mean? So these are all questions that are actually in the midst of being addressed, both through the court and through the city. Now, industry states that they can't deploy 5G, or that it's going to be hard for them to deploy 5G in countries that have precautionary or lower radio frequency radiation limits, because the United States allows far more radiation than a lot of countries, China, Russia, several countries in Europe, India. And in those countries, the industry is saying this is going to be a problem for the deployment of 5G, because you have so many antennas so close, it's such densification. There are many published studies linking not just towers, but cell tower radiation, the non-ionizing radiation, to adverse effects. And I can go at length and discuss them with you. But for this talk, I'm not going to too deeply, other than to show you a few of them and to show you a page where we link to the peer-reviewed and published research. What's happened is that the authorities that decide if an effect is established or not established are captured by industry itself, or industry money. There are many, I'm not going to go through all of these, many scientists and organizations putting forward calls, appeals, letters, calling for a halt to 5G because of the science showing that non-ionizing radiation has effects. And these effects are at levels far, far lower than what you might, what our limits are. And I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of times lower. This is the website of the 5G appeal. You can go there. You can see the signatories. I think there are certainly over 200 signatories at this point of scientists who have published in the peer-reviewed literature who are calling for a halt to 5G. So what everyone asks me is, well, so what are insurance companies doing? What are they doing? If anyone cares, it's the insurance companies about this issue. What are they okay with this? So this is a report that just came out from Swiss Re. But before I talk about it, I want to tell you that reports going back for years have classified non-ionizing radiation as a high emerging risk. Not only that, but insurance companies have electromagnetic field exclusion clauses. They do not cover health damages or harm from long-term exposure to this type of radiation. So most recently, Swiss Re came out with their report on new and emerging risks, and 5G, which is in a section of the report entitled Off the Leash, 5G Off the Leash, rates the impact as high. And they talk about all kinds of things related to, information and security issues, privacy issues, but also, and I'll just read the quote, growing concerns of the health implications of 5G may lead to political friction and delay of implementation and to liability claims. The introductions of 3G and 4G faced similar challenges. And as the biological effects of EMF in general, and 5G in particular, are still being debated, potential claims for health impairments may come with a long latency. And this is all available on our website. I can certainly send it to you if you'd like. In fact, not only do insurance companies not want to risk their financial stability with electromagnetic radiation, non-ionizing radiation, but the wireless companies themselves actually warn their shareholders of the risk. And I'll read what Crown Castle says. Now, Crown Castle is sort of like a real estate agent for cell antennas. They will get the pole, they will find carriers like Verizon or Sprint or T-Mobile to come on the pole, and they do a lot of the managing of the pole in the facility. If frequency emissions from wireless handsets or equipment on our communications infrastructure are demonstrated to cause negative health effects, potential future claims could adversely affect our operations, costs, or revenues. We currently do not maintain any significant insurance with respect to these matters. They don't have insurance because no one will insure them. Insurance was dropped decades ago, actually, with the first brain tumors got media play. And Verizon and all of the carriers actually have something similar in their annual reports. We have a page on our website, ehtrust.org. You can go there and you can see many of the different statements by these different carriers. So I decided to sort of look, well, what's happening in Ohio? And I, of course, went to Crown Castle because they're the ones who are putting these up. And I found out, very interestingly, and then this started, and I didn't have time to go deeper, but I thought it was fascinating. They are collaborating, and this really could be a great idea. I mean, I am an artist myself, and I think art is very important. I love city art. And so what they've done is take the equipment cabinets, and they have a whole they're collaborating with the Arts Council and decorating them. And I clipped the quote where they say, this is helping making this engaging. But actually, while I appreciate that art is happening, I don't think, it's like putting lipstick on I have no words for this. And you can see down here is one of the cabinets, and then here is the small cell. So they're collaborating and having artists have a contest to decorate the equipment. And then here's another one here. And this one, and here's the antenna equipment. Something to know is that once you have equipment up, things can be added on. And as well, other carriers are allowed by law, they should be allowed to set up their facilities. So this is just the beginning of what we would expect in terms of antennas. Now I want to share this video with you. It's a very short video by investigative journalists out of Europe. It's Investigate Europe. It's like their video of their report. They have a well-documented report about 5G, about the financial interests involved in it, and they talk about how there is these agencies or authorities that are purporting that this is safe when actually there are, and a report just came out of Europe actually commissioned by some members of parliament showing there are so many financial ties between industry and the authorities who are making decisions or who are making recommendations regarding the science. And there are many scientists who are involved in this who are financed by industry. I talk about that in a lot of webinars. So if this interests you, please watch some of our other videos we have them all on our YouTube channel.
There's a revolution on the way. It's the 5G revolution. Although some say this will be more like an experiment that will affect billions of people. 5G stands for fifth generation mobile services. The internet will be faster than ever. Downloading a high-definition movie will take mere seconds. By 2025, the European Commission is planning for all urban areas across the continent to have seamless 5G coverage. This will enable a new age in the Internet of Things. Smart driverless cars and smart hospitals, smart fridges, coffee makers, and even baby diapers. But what citizens are not told is that for this to happen, countless new antennas will be added. In our neighborhoods, our workplaces, even in our homes. Are mobile communications dangerous? The scientific community is divided. Some experts maintain they are safe, others have serious concerns. In 2011, the WHO classified electromagnetic fields associated with cell phones as possibly carcinogenic to humans. And studies published in 2018 showed that when rats were exposed to such fields, it increased their risk of certain types of cancer. Even among those who believe the technology is safe, many admit that more studies are needed. And for 5G, there are almost no studies. Telecom companies themselves have noted that electromagnetic signals may pose health risks. So why are the EU Commission and our governments turning a blind eye? They cite guidelines established by transnational scientific bodies. But Investigate Europe has found that these bodies are closed clubs. People with dissenting opinions are not invited in. And a significant number of the scientists involved have received funding from companies with vested interests in the 5G rollout. There is no risk-free society. Other things we consume are also bad for our health, from alcohol to junk food. But if you don't want a hamburger, you can simply avoid hamburgers. With 5G, there is no opt-out.
And I think I'm just going to do a few more slides and then talk about any questions. But there actually there's one study, there's been a second published, but it's the same group, looking at the higher frequencies that are going to be used in 5G and how they might affect bees. And this is the first paper that was done to look at how bees absorb this in insects. Actually, they looked at 5 insects, and they found that at the higher frequencies, the bees had they had a more intense absorption of the radiation, and the authors warn this can lead to changes to insect behavior, physiology, morphology over time due to an increase in body temperatures. And of course, bees are flying around, as are birds, and there's already research showing impacts to bees from radio frequency radiation. In fact, that's one of the reasons why India dropped their allowable limits and made them allow less after doing an interministerial report, which looked at all the studies on birds and bees and said, well, you know, there's something here. This is not a clean, it's not getting a clean, there's not a clean slate. So we have on our website a lot of this, but there is also extensive research on animals and also birds. There's a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service report, which we have online, as well as senior staff members who used to work with the Fish and Wildlife Service, documenting the research on birds and cows, even fish. We're all electrical. So to think that if we keep increasing and adding this type of exposure is not going to affect us, I don't think it's quite logical. Now, it's not the same radiation as an X-ray. It's not ionizing. It's not the same when we talk about the atomic bomb. However, there really is an extensive body of research showing effects from non-ionizing radiation. Okay, so in addition, there are issues related to trees. This is just one of the many studies that's entitled Radiofrequency Radiation Injures Trees Around Mobile Base Stations. And this was a long-term field study in 2 cities over many years. And they found statistically significant damage to trees. First, it would be on the side of the tree facing the antennas, and then over time, the tree would be, as many of them were felled. Not all, and this is one of the pictures that is in that study, which we have online. We also have a downloadable sheet which talks about the impacts to the environment from energy consumption to birds, bees, and trees. And this is just images from it. It's all hyperlinked, so you can email it and people can click on it to go to the links and not have to print it out. How did we get into this situation? Well, I think that the big tech makes big tobacco look like a mom and pop shop because they looked at tobacco. They're following the playbook of tobacco, but they did it even better by having their, like right now we have, for example, Ajit Pai and Brennan Carr at the FCC, and they are former counsels for the wireless industry. Before that, we had Tom Wheeler, who is was the head of the wireless industry for many years. And he was the head of the wireless industry when they did this over $20 million study that started to find effects. And actually, there was a scientist who you could think of as a whistleblower who wrote a whole book about it, George Carlo. And Tom Wheeler, really put everything in motion for 5G at the FCC. There's a lot of regulations that went into place which set the stage for where we are now. He's not with the FCC anymore. Then, of course, we have people who are FCC commissioners that then left and became the head of various wireless companies. Meredith Baker is now the head of the CTIA, so she switched places with Tom Wheeler. So when you have a job in government, you'll have a good job in industry after. If you have a job in industry, you can leave and have a job in government. And a Harvard report documented this, captured agency, how the Federal Communications Commission is dominated by the industry it presumably regulates. I recommend this as a primer if you're interested in this piece of the story, which is a critical piece of the story of how we got where we are. And he talks about how the telecom industry is using big tobacco tactics. And this is just a picture. I talked about how different countries have different allowable limits of radio frequency radiation. This is one of the many studies. It's looking at cell towers and looking at the blood, and found markers in the blood that are actually markers of precancerous conditions in people who are closer to towers compared to people who are further away. And they also took measurements to understand what the levels were. Children are more vulnerable to radio frequency radiation. We know that from cell phone research, both with looking at a far field antenna like a cell tower or an antenna that's close like a phone. Children are more exposed. They have more of their body, which has more intense exposures. Dr. Ronald Melnick, who's one of our advisors, who used to work at the National Institutes of Health for 28 years, and he designed the National Toxicology Program study that the FDA asked for because our limits are not looking at long-term exposures. They're only looking at short-term exposures. When we set our radiation limits in the United States, it wasn't based on what would happen after 30, 40 years. It was based on what would happen with a short-term high exposure. So this design was set up with $30 million, it was done. They found effects at levels where they shouldn't have. And this is Dr. Melnick presenting. You can watch his video online, and where he explains the whole study. He also debunks many of the criticisms that are being put forth about the study.
What does the public need to know? There have been multiple studies have found increases in cancer associated with exposure to radiofrequency radiation. This is animals and humans. Because of the widespread use of cell phones, even a small increase in cancer risk would have a serious public health impact. I strongly feel precautionary principles should be promoted by health and regulatory agencies, especially for children and pregnant women. The agencies in the US say, if you are concerned, that puts the burden on the individual. It doesn't say, we are concerned. It should be very straightforward. Precautionary principles should be promoted because, as mentioned earlier, risk can be greater for children than adults due to the increased penetration of the radiation within brains of children, and the developing nervous system is more susceptible to tissue-damaging agents. So finally, what is the lesson that should be learned? When dealing with assumptions, I think we've shown that assumptions in this case can be wrong, so that we should no longer assume that any current or future wireless technology, including 5G, is safe without adequate testing. Thank you.
So cancer is only the tip of the iceberg in terms of the research, what research has found. Do scientists say they have all the answers? No. But there's enough there, and different scientists have different viewpoints on this in terms of where they are with the science. But the majority of the independent scientists, at least from what we've seen in terms of appeals and letters, are saying we need to halt 5G and ensure that there is research that shows safety, because there's so much research that is showing effects. And what we certainly don't have is a study that's looked at 5G to ensure that it's safe. There are a lot of studies that have found effects with wireless frequencies, and the telecom, or the scientists who are funded by telecom, are saying that we'll attack it, and for many reasons, but there's not, that they're attacking this study and that study and the other study for this reason or that, which I could go into, and if you ever wanted to have that conversation, we can have that, and I can show you clips from scientists talking about different studies and explaining why those criticisms are inaccurate. However, there isn't a study that shows 5G is safe. It hasn't been done. Hey, let's take some, some different, do those studies with cells or with animals to see if it's safe. We certainly wouldn't want to do it to people. That would be unethical, to expose people to this, and especially children, and to children, and to see what happens over time, over 10, 20 years of an exposure every day. Only that's what we're actually doing, and it's involuntary, and we can't control it, because it's going to increase the levels of radiation, and you can put down your phone, but you can't turn off a cell tower. This is one of the many studies, Cindy Russell talking about data gaps, what we know, what we don't know. We believe and are supporting movements towards healthy technology. That's wired technology. We do not want people to go without internet connections. We are supporting a wired to and through the premises. So fiber optic that's municipally owned, not owned by a commercial entity, which is connecting homes, and it's fast, safe, and more secure. When we have awareness, then we can have a discussion, and then there can be action. What's happening now is it's quite challenging to have that conversation. I might give this talk, you might go and talk to another entity that'll say, no, and here's the reasons why what she said isn't true. But then there's not that space to have that dialogue where I can say, well, wait, you're saying that the NTP is only about animals and not about people. Well, let me explain what Dr. Melnick says, that, that you have to run the numbers and look at other research studies and find out what it means for humans. So there is important research. I'm sorry, I'm reading your questions too. A webpage of 5gcrisis.com. They have toolkits, they have letters, they have a lot of awareness raising materials. It's an important resource. The New Hampshire, in terms of something that people can do, is look at getting a state law passed like New Hampshire did. They have a commission to study 5G and wireless. There's also Oregon has passed a bill calling for a look at the research on wireless radiation, especially related to children. And in the 5G Commission of New Hampshire, you can go into their notes and really see what the materials they're looking at. They're inviting people from all over to testify, from industry, I testified, different scientists who are studying this issue. And they have people on their commission from stakeholders in all different positions. I think it's a wonderful model, and I would recommend taking a look at what they're doing. And of course, there are several, if you've gone to our website, I hope you've gone to Environmental Health Trust, ehtrust.org. We have a page on international policy to halt 5G. And there are hundreds, over 500 governments, cities, municipalities in Italy that have issued resolutions to halt 5G. In the United States, there are many cities that are passing ordinances to restrict where these small cells go, these facilities go. Some have even prohibited the facilities in the rights of way under certain conditions. Setbacks for schools. I know that Santa Barbara, Keene, New Hampshire are halting 5G. Easton, Connecticut has halted 5G. There was a city in Tennessee that passed a resolution to halt 5G. So this is happening. It's on our website at ehtrust.org under key issues under 5G. And I'm not going to read all of these because I want to get to some of your questions. Is it possible to have already installed antennas removed? This is a question. If they're too close to homes and causing injury, how are these installed without local environmental permits? So every case is different. There's certainly people who are struggling right now trying to have these antennas removed from right in front of their home. I just did an interview, it's online on YouTube right now, with a family in Sacramento. They were not able to get it removed. On the other hand, there was a school in California, Ripon, where they had a cell tower, and there were several children, and in fact some teachers who developed cancer, and that cell tower was removed. Now, it doesn't mean that there was acknowledgement or, established proof that it was the cell tower, but there were enough people that got together and packed meeting rooms that said, hey, we want this to be moved, and that's what happened in that case. There are a couple cases that I know of schools where antennas have been removed. I know of a case in my community nearby where a family just they were relentless. It's something called a strand antenna. It goes like on the electrical wires, and it's really small. It's another way to get these antennas out is to hang them on the wires and have a really teeny, make them look small. But this mother knew what it was, and she advocated so hard that they moved it. Now, unfortunately, they moved it, of course, to someone else's house, but they did move it. And the problem is that what we need is policy change, so that rather than moving these around to someone else's yard, we have a telecommunications infrastructure that works, that connects us, but is not harming us. And that's the big picture. And one of our goals is to have the Environmental Protection Agency or an agency with the expertise, independent of industry, to develop proper safety limits, because we don't even have those in the United States. That means we know at what level it causes harm, at what level we know is safe, that does not cause harm. And we've looked at humans, bees, trees, birds, flora, fauna, and are setting levels that protect the environment. So how are these getting installed without local environmental permits? I don't know for every case in your area, but I know in our area, they're really, following NEPA, which is the law that needs to be followed, doesn't mean there's a deep environmental review every time a cell tower is put up. It simply means that there's a process. First is there needs to be a checking off of basically a box. Does there need to be a deeper investigation, or does this seem like it's not going to have a big environmental effect? And for a lot of cases, they just check the box. Or in many cases, the box hasn't even been checked and nobody knows that the box has not been checked. And there isn't any review. We believe that there should be a full environmental review for the United States, and that the FCC should have done this, and they have not done this. What is the best legal argument against the claim that the 1996 Telecom Act prohibits consideration of health or environmental harms in challenging installation of 5G cell towers? Well, thank you for bringing that up to the person who asked this question. So I should probably have talked about the laws that bind us. But the 1996 Telecom Act, which was the most heavily lobbied bill, I think, ever in the United States, actually has Section 704 that says you cannot, environmental concerns cannot be part of the reason you decide or don't decide where to put a tower, so long as the FCC limits are met. So long as it's compliant with our FCC limits, you can't use environmental concerns. And then there was case law. There was lawsuits that happened because of that section, and case law in some circuits. And I haven't looked into how it applies in Ohio. I know it does in Maryland. There is, not completely, it gets kind of technical, but what you'll probably hear from your council person is, I cannot talk about health. Because the Telecom Act says that, I can't talk about health. So to that I would say first, you, the people, can talk about health. But the reality is, there's a lot more to talk about. This is not just about health effects, although most people I know who are working on this, many of them are concerned about the health, but there are a lot of reasons, from privacy to aesthetics, to maybe looking at impact to the tree trimming that can be looked at. Is this really matched with the character of your neighborhood? The other aspect of that is that this isn't a concern. It's documented science, and there have been some people that argue one way to respond to your question is to bring up that this is not a concern, it is a fact. It's a fact that limits are, over 24 years old. It's a fact that there are so many scientists saying that this should be halted. There have been many efforts to to pull out that section or rewrite Section 704 so that people can advocate for their health and the environment in terms of where cell towers are sited. And I think eventually that's going to come back, because it's unconstitutional, in my opinion, to be pulling away, not allowing people to advocate for their health. Is there any correlation between oxidative stress and virus-like symptoms? I am not a scientist who can answer that question. What I can say is that oxidative stress has been found in many, many studies to be linked to non-ionizing radiation. And there's a study that was done that we have on our website. If you just search oxidative stress, I'm sure it'll come up. It was a review, and it found over 90% of the studies that looked at endpoints related to oxidative stress found an effect. And in fact, a lot of the research looking at sperm and reproductive damage has pointed out that it could be that oxidative stress is what is leading to the damage to the testes or to the reproductive organs. There's a large body of literature on that. FCC limits is the linchpin then for all elected officials to avoid action. Perhaps, but I would say this, this is something as someone asked, there is nothing you can do. For someone to say, well, I can't do anything because of FCC limits is, in my mind, look, there's so much that people are doing. So you can't say there's nothing you can do. There can be protective ordinances passed. If you don't have a protective ordinance in your community, look into having something which retains as much of your authority as possible. If you don't have an ordinance in place or a permitting process, then really you can be run over by telecom. And if you have something in place that opens the door, well, maybe it's time to relook at that, to think about, having more plans, more permitting process in place that's more protective. So as an example, some communities have radio frequency testing that they do before and also every year, a re-permitting process, because the United States doesn't test for radio frequency levels, and it'd be important to have that information. There can be limits that are set on how much distance from the building, preferably, I think one community has 600 feet, some have 500 feet. I know one that has 1,000 feet. That's all on our website. I want to get to, this is Dr. Hardell. If you're interested in the science, please look at some of the recent presentations by Dr. Leonard Hardell. He worked on Agent Orange in the 80s and was raising the warning flag on that.
I would end with this picture showing, I was interviewed by a Swedish journalist a couple of weeks ago, and she said all the time, like a mantra, that the majority of researchers say that this is safe. There is no risk whatsoever with anything with radio frequency. She had interviewed before me a Swedish prominent person, Maria Feisting. But what you can think of is that this is a majority. It's not the majority. They are quite few. The majority have, for example, signed the EMF Science Appeal, which is almost 250 scientists that have signed it, and all with their own research in this area, like Martin Paul and others. These persons are sitting in different organizations, as you can see here, within WHO group, expert group, within ICNIRP, without United States AGNIR, without the Swedish Radiation Protection Agency, and with SKINIR. And the problem is here that you will get repetition of what is said, because, for example, Maria Feistings, she says that she's not here to defend, but she has heard this from me before, so she knows it. She can say, but look here, ICNIRP came to the same conclusion, and look here in United Kingdom, AGNIR, and the Swedish Radiation Protection Agency, they came to the same conclusion. The problem is that it's the same persons. If you in ICNIRP come to one conclusion, you are not expected to go to another organization and come to a different conclusion. So this is a very dangerous situation, because like SSM in Sweden, they are not allowing any critical person. All the persons who are sitting there are those yes or no sayers. I mean, they say, no, there is not any risk. And they make their assessment yearly, updating what evidence has come. They do not make an overview of several years, for example, what is the total pattern. For example, when the NTP study came out with the American animal study, Maria Feisting was very quick to go out to media and say, well, yes, look here, the researchers who were doing the microscopic studies of exposed and unexposed animals, they knew what animals were exposed and who was not exposed, so they were biased. And NTP was contacted and said this was not the case. We have good qualification of what we are doing, and this is published. But I mean, if you can't do anything else, you create doubt. I mean, like a book which is written, doubt is their product, which comes from industry. So I would say that the situation just now is more alike than this, and we need people to waken up. The scientific data are there. It's clearly this type of radiation is dangerous to human health and maybe to nature. And I would say that it's time to act and not to let 5G to be implemented all over the world until research has been done. I mean, it's fine if there is no risk, but that needs to be shown.
And he's a leading expert on this issue. And I just wanted to show you, oh, these are just protesting from around the world that's happening. But I wanted to get to this, and then I'm going to unscreen share so I can talk to you because I can't see the chat right now. But there's several Facebook groups that are working on this, and I think there are people on the call. And once I unscreen save, I'll be able to see if anyone wants to speak from some of these groups. Cleveland area, there's Citizens for 5G Awareness, Northeast Ohio, South West Ohio for Responsible Technology. There's Dayton area group. There's also Stop Smart Meters Ohio. If you don't know what smart meters are, you're going to learn, because every installation, not every actually, but many installations here will have a smart meter. Those also emit radio frequency radiation. There's so many other issues related to smart meters as well. Privacy being one of them, key one. And I just want to look at the chat if anyone has any. Okay, and if anyone wants to raise their hand or speak, I'm glad to answer more questions. I think I talked for a long time and I don't have a timer right here, so. Okay, so if you do, just raise your hand in the chat by clicking on that, and I'm glad to have you speak, because I've been talking to several groups in Ohio about this issue, and I just wanted to offer information for people who had questions or elected officials. We have on our website an extensive amount of letters that we've written to officials, and I can show it to you. Oh, I see a question here. Where the ordinances have been passed, have they been preempted by state legislatures? Well, it depends on where you are as to what's going on. In Maryland, which is where I am, we don't have a state streamlining bill yet. Now that has been proposed multiple times, and every time, and each time more so, more and more people are coming and opposing that bill, and it has not been passed. So we've had several local areas working on more protective ordinances in our area and in California. I think there are times where it could be preempted, and this is new law that's happening now, so it's all playing out. I don't know of a specific case, though, where that's happened. And I don't believe that Ohio has passed a streamlining bill. I know you had something attached to the, it's like some pet bill a few years ago. Oops. I cannot get, oh. Okay. Oh, thank you. Someone said thank you. I'm glad to answer any more questions that you have. I can even show you more of those pictures from Crown Castle in Ohio. I guess my question to you who are on the call would be, are you able to get the information on where these small cells are proposed? You know, are you, one of the challenges we have in communities are people find out about this and don't know even where to look. How do I know where one's being proposed? How do I know where they're coming? What's the process and more? And I see someone has their hand up, so I'm gonna allow Henry to talk. So Henry, you're on. You raised your hand.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Thea.
Hi.
Thank you so much for doing this. We really, really appreciate it, and all of your work that you've done on 5G awareness. Very much appreciated. In case some of the folks are in the Akron area and are able to attend a public meeting that we have scheduled for Thursday, July 18th at 6:30. So I'll just go ahead and read the letter that was drafted. It says, Dear Akron City Council members, we are a group of citizens who are concerned about the installation of 5G small cells in our neighborhoods. We understand that there are real health risks as well as environmental risks associated with these cells and feel that there needs to be more discussion before our families are permanently exposed to them. We have also reviewed the map of the proposed cells and the agreement between the city and the telecom company and find that the city's best practices mentioned the agreement conflict with the location of many of the cells. We would like to invite you to a public meeting of concerned citizens who will discuss the pros and cons of these new 5G cells in our neighborhoods. It will be held at Will Christie Park on Thursday, July 18th at 6:30 p.m. Please bring a folding chair. If you have any questions, please email neosafetech@gmail.com.
Mark Hertzgaard, the nation's environment correspondent and investigative editor. So, Mark Hertzgaard, if you could reiterate, at this point in 2018, as you evaluate the science or talk to the scientists who are evaluating it, what do you think is of most concern about cell phones? And then talk about ways to mitigate the effects of cell phones.
Sure. I want to emphasize I'm not a scientist. I'm a journalist and an author, but we talk to a lot of scientists. And our story does not say whether cell phones are safe or not. We looked at the industry disinformation and propaganda campaign that for the past 25 years has been convincing the public that these cell phones are safe. And the way they've done that is to war game the science, as they put it in an internal memo from Motorola. They've funded their friendly scientists, they've attacked critical science, independent science, they've put their own people onto advisory boards. All that said, that's resulted in, I think, the message coming across from the mainstream media, frankly, that cell phones are safe enough, shall we say. However, that point of view took a major hit just last week, the night before we released our story. there was a peer review by independent scientists of the biggest study that the United States government has had to date on cell phone radiation. This was a study by the U.S. National Toxicology Program, that's part of the National Institutes of Health. The study was commissioned by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and released some preliminary findings in February, and then those findings were peer-reviewed by independent scientists last week. And those independent scientists finally concluded that there was, quote, clear evidence, unquote, clear evidence that cell phone radiation can cause cancers. And notably, those independent scientists upgraded the confidence level of that and other findings by this National Toxicology Program. So what that seemed to do was to confirm the suspicions by outsiders that the National Toxicology Program brass, the people up at the top, were trying to downplay this study because it was the very same data that had been released in 2016, and when that data was released in 2016, it came with a public health warning by the National Toxicology Program. Then in 2018, back in February, they tried to downplay this. So it's very significant that last week these independent scientists said, oh no, there is clear evidence here that cell phones can cause cancer. Now, before you all worry out there that you're having the equivalent of a cigarette habit, let me just say that the evidence is not yet definitive of how high the risk is for cancer, and genetic damage is another concern here. But it is definitely, it seems, a risk. If you look at the scientific data that is compiled by the National Institutes of Health, the actual studies that they catalog there, the vast majority of them do indicate that there are health impacts of this technology, of this radiation, I should say, according to Henry Lai, a professor at the University of Washington who's analyzed all of this, and we talked with him in some detail. So there are things you can do. The main thing you can do as a consumer is to minimize your use of your cell phone. Use a landline telephone whenever you can, and if you must use a cell phone, always use earbuds, and use it for as little time as possible. Don't go on and on. Have your phone call and complete it. And in general, you want to try and minimize the risk. Again, I am not a pediatrician. I'm not a doctor here. You can talk to organizations like the American Pediatrics Association, which, by the way, told the Federal Communications Commission 5 years ago that they needed to revisit this question because their standards weren't adequate. The FCC has not done that, but you can talk to them. You can talk to a group called the Environment Health Trust, and they will give you more information on this. That's
really interesting that you talk about the FCC, and they haven't done that, because the former head of the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, was Tom Wheeler. In 1999, then the president of the Cellular Telecommunications and Internet Association, Thomas Wheeler, spoke to ABC News 2020. Listen carefully.
I believe that the cellular phone is safe. Our industry has gone out and aggressively asked the question, can we find a problem? And the answer that has come back is that there is nothing that has come up in the research that suggests that there is a linkage between the use of a wireless phone and health effects.
So that was, yes, Thomas Wheeler, who was President Obama's pick as FCC chair, speaking to Brian Ross on ABC. Mark Hertsgaard, can you talk about his role?
And that was a lie. That was a lie that Mr. Wheeler told. We spoke with Mr. Wheeler for this story. He gave us an interview, but insisted on putting it off the record, except for one statement that said that he followed the recommendations of the Food and Drug Administration, which had found no dangers from health phones. But what he told Brian Ross in that story, that they went out and aggressively questioned the science, was their problem, that part was true. But to say that they found no such evidence, that was an absolute lie. And I use the word lie deliberately. He knew perfectly well by that time that he had been told by George Carlo, the scientist, that there were serious questions from their own $28.5 million research program. And so to me, the career of Tom Wheeler is an interesting illustration of a very old story in Washington, D.C. about how the regulatory agencies of the federal government get captured by the very industries that they are supposed to regulate. So Wheeler left the industry and later went on to head the FCC for President Obama. And in the meantime, it's gone the other way around. The FCC vice president at the FCC, I guess, or vice chair rather, Baker, came to now runs the Trade Association. And this is why the Harvard study on this by Norm Alster calls the FCC a captured agency. They have been captured by the industry they're supposed to regulate. And the single best example of that I can give you is the FCC does not even independently test the radiation levels on these phones. They take what the industry claims and just put it on their website. That is not good enough. Part of the reason that we're down this road all the way we are so far is that we did not test cell phones back in the 1980s before they went on the consumer market. And we're about to make that same mistake again with 5G technology.
Well, can you explain what 5G technology is?
Sure. 5G means fifth generation, and that's the next generation of the technologies that have been used for cell phones and wireless going back into the 1990s. And where people might have heard of it most is 5G technology is what will be required if we go to this thing called the Internet of Things. The Internet of Things is the idea of your smartphone being connected to your smart car and your smart household so that all of your appliances, your cell phones, your computers, everything will be connected 24/7 so that you can, while you're driving home, you can turn on the oven 25 minutes from home so that it's nice and warm and you can make your dinner when you get home. That seems like it's a kind of a convenient idea, perhaps, but when we did the reporting on this, my colleague Mark Dowie went to the conference of the industry and saw, and we have this picture in the Nation magazine story, saw a picture of a baby, a doll, wearing a diaper, and at the crotch of the diaper is a little transmitter. So this transmitter, under the 5G technology, Internet of Things, this transmitter will send a little message to mom or dad in the next room that, oh, the baby's diaper needs changing. Well, do we really need that? And do we really want to have radiation going from our baby's crotch to our cell phones? Why don't we just walk into the next room and check for ourselves?
In January 1993, David Reynard of Tampa, Florida, sued the NEC America company. Speaking on national TV, Reynard said his wife's NEC phone caused her lethal brain tumor. Let's go to a clip from ABC News' 2020 investigation that aired in 1999 that begins with Reynard.
Tumor was exactly in the pattern of the antenna.
David Reynard went on to almost single-handedly create a national scare when he filed a lawsuit and went public with his allegations.
Well, we're suing the carrier, we're suing the manufacturer.
There was great alarm on Wall Street, and even though Reynard's lawsuit was later thrown out by a judge for a lack of reliable scientific evidence, it left the cell phone industry with a huge public relations problem.
So, Mark, could you comment on that and also the distinction, if there is any, in terms of possible risks of using a cell phone to talk as against using it for email or for texting? Is there a difference from what you've learned about possible risks?
That's really where the wireless industry's propaganda campaign was launched. Because as Brian Ross's report just showed, they had a huge public relations problem at that point. There were congressional subcommittees beginning to investigate. The stock on Wall Street was tanking. And that's when Tom Wheeler stepped up and immediately told a hastily gathered press conference, cell phones are safe, but we're going to revalidate that with this new science. And that was how they then found George Carlo, the scientist who they hired to do that. And it's interesting, George Carlo, I wouldn't call him a whistleblower exactly, but he certainly did not work out the way that the industry had hoped. They had hired him because he seemed like, by his own acknowledgement in our interviews with him, he seemed like an industry guy. And they thought that because he had previously done studies in which he said dioxin was not terribly harmful in small quantities. Dioxin, of course, was behind the Love Canal and the Agent Orange scandals, one of the most toxic chemicals on Earth. He'd also said that breast implants were not necessarily dangerous. So George Carlos seemed like the kind of guy who would return a friendly verdict for the industry, and then he did not. And that is really where their ways parted. And Carlo eventually told the truth, both to Brian Ross and to us, and in a book, Cell Phone Radiation, if listeners want to check that out. Now, to your question, Amin, about the differences, again, I'm not a scientist here. I'm a little uncomfortable talking about that. There are plenty of places where you can go to get good information on this. I'd recommend the National Environment Trust is one. The American Pediatrics Association has also raised concerns about this. However, I do know this from sources that we've interviewed on this story, that you want to always wear earbuds if you're going to use a phone. You want to minimize your use of the phone. And yes, texting is better than a phone call in terms of the amount of radiation you're exposed to. And also, the moment of the connection of the call is when there is the biggest surge of radiation. That is, after you've dialed and you hear it ringing and then it connects to the other phone, at that moment, hold that phone away from you. The farther away it is from your skull, the less radiation that is going to be touching you. But again, the main thing is to just limit your use of all of this to the maximum extent that you can. Use landlines when you can. You know, the world still spun on its axis. We all had our lives before there were cell phones. You can do it, folks.
I wanted to ask you about the criticism of your piece. Dr. David Gorski, a surgical oncologist at Barbara Ann Karmanos Cancer Institute, wrote a piece for his blog Science-Based Medicine criticizing your report. His post is headlined, "The Nation Indulges in Fear-Mongering About Cell Phones and Cancer." In it, Dr. Gorski writes, an article published last week in The Nation likens wireless telephone companies to tobacco and fossil fuel episodes in their tactics of spreading fear, misinformation, and doubt regarding the science of cell phone radiation and health. To produce this narrative, the investigation's authors rely on unreliable sources and cherry-pick scientific studies, ignoring the scientific consensus that cell phone radiation almost certainly doesn't cause cancer, all the while disingenuously claiming that they aren't taking a position on the health effects of radio waves. And Dr. Gorski continues, the idea that the radio frequency electromagnetic radiation used by cell phones and wireless networks is somehow causing horrendous health effects in humans, be it cancer, brain, breast, or other, behavioral problems, mental illness, or whatever, is like anti-vaccine pseudoscience, a claim not supported by evidence that just will not go away, says Dr. Gorski. Your response to that, Mark Hertzgaard?
Thank you, Dr. Gorski, for providing such a illuminating illustration of the very kind of disinformation campaign we're talking about here. We're not scientists, but maybe he would revisit his blog post if he looked at what the peer review of independent credentialed scientists just said last week about the National Toxicology Program's finding. They said, quote unquote, clear evidence that cell phone radiation causes cancer. We are not cherry picking. That is exactly what the biggest study ever funded by the United States government has said about this. And it was not what the government agency was trying to say. The government agency was trying to retreat from that position, and it's only because of peer-reviewed scientists on the outside that we know that. Go back and read our piece and compare it to the good doctor's blog. I'm very confident that our reporting stands up.
Dozens of firefighters came to the Board of Supervisors to let them know they don't want cell towers where they work.
The proximity of the towers and people living next to the towers is of grave concern, but it's a very complex issue as to how those radio waves affect people all the way up to 3 miles away.
The towers are going up at fire stations and sheriff stations, part of a new high-tech communication system to help first responders talk with each other.
President of the LA County Firefighters Union, Local 1014, but more importantly, realize I'm also a 25-year veteran fire captain. I've been a paramedic and engineer. I work at Fire Station 16, where outside of my kitchen window I can now throw a stone to a 70-foot tower that is closer to the 2-story apartment building with some of the low-income kids that we mentor at our station who've not had a voice in this. And I stand allied with not only the residents that we serve at my fire station, but with community members who are here today, and I want to cut to it. I have never felt like going out and buying a pack of cigarettes more than right now and getting my smoke on, because everything's going to just be okay, isn't it? There is no scientific data correlating smoking of cigarettes and cancer. Wait, there is no scientific data correlating cancer and firefighters going into smoke-filled environments. I've been through Senate and Assembly hearings making testimony to this fact, only to hear things like that brought up like we heard here today. It's ridiculous. This is a 20-year-old standard they're recurringly going back to, which is not even a safety standard. There's no health and safety people involved in this FCC standard. It's 20 years old, people. It's time to get current.
I want to be clear once again that UFLAC supports Local 1014, opposes the LA RICS putting poles up where we live and spend one.
Yeah, Joyce and Patrick, some of those people here in Greendale worry that these orange markers popping up all over town are in preparation for 5G technology. That is said to be faster than current data speeds, but requires cell phone towers to be closer to their users.
It's picking up radio frequency radiation.
Elaine Unger with Wisconsin for Safe Technology is showing me what kind of radiation we might be exposing ourselves to, just being near any wireless device.
And you can see that it's going into the red zone on the left side. And your cell phone is turned on, and it's doing this because it's emitting radio frequency radiation, also known as microwave radiation.
Unger lives in Greendale and stands with hundreds of scientists and doctors around the world who have signed a moratorium to stop the rollout of 5G wireless technology that's said to be 100 times faster than 4G. Companies like AT&T and Verizon are competing to set up 5G in cities around the country, but they haven't touched Wisconsin yet. A spokesperson for Verizon told me they have no plans for 5G in Greendale and that these orange markers are to extend their 4G LTE service through underground fiber optic cables. Unger, who has hardwired most of her home devices, wants safer technology and fears it's only a matter of time before 5G penetrates our homes and our schools.
Right now, there are over 12,000 studies showing harm from wireless radiation, from cell towers to cell phones, to tablets to Chromebooks. We are talking about migraine headaches, chronic fatigue, depression, anxiety, links to autism and ADHD, cancers, diabetes, thyroid problems.
Caroline, you heard from Verizon. What did they say about the safety concerns?
Yeah, Patrick, Verizon Wireless tells me that their technology is constantly under review by different health and safety organizations and is within federal guidelines. But Unger tells me that those guidelines are well over 30 years old and need to be changed.
Caroline Reinwell reporting live in Greendale tonight.
5G fifth generation technology promises faster download speeds and conveniences that most of us have never dreamed of, but will also be blanketed with a new type of radiation called millimeter waves. Health experts are warning about the rising risks with a 5G rollout.
It's not been made clear to the public that 5G won't just be another number and letter on your cell phone. It requires an entirely new infrastructure of thousands of small cellular antennas to be erected throughout cities where it's going to be installed.
What would 5G infrastructure look like? Small cell antennas could be placed as close as every third hydro pole. Scientists from 42 countries are now warning their governments about the emerging health problems associated with wireless radiation. And Canadian doctors and scientists have added their voices.
The most prevalent symptoms include headache, fatigue, decreased ability to concentrate, tinnitus, irritability, and insomnia. Impacts on the heart and the nervous system are also of great concern.
Dr. Magda Havas is internationally recognized for her research on the biological effects of electromagnetic pollution. She said that at high intensities, these waves cause intense heat and pain because sweat glands on the surface of our skin act like mini antennas.
At lower frequency, scientists are predicting damage to eyes, loss of insect populations which are already declining, antibiotic resistance in bacteria, and physiological effects on the nervous system and on the immune system.
10.
One advisor to the World Health Organization said there's enough evidence that if they were to re-evaluate radiofrequency radiation,
it would be placed in class 1, i.e. a human carcinogen, and governments could not possibly ignore that.
Maybe you've heard about exciting new 5G technology that promises to make our connections to the internet and all of the things connected to the internet faster and better than ever. Like other cell phone technology, 5G emits radiation. 2 federal agencies recently said the available scientific evidence does not support the idea that 5G emits enough radiation to hurt people. But some scientists disagree. At first, the concern sounded far-fetched. We were surprised by what we learned. Is it your feeling that mobile phone use and 5G in the future have been and are causes of chronic disease epidemics in this country?
I believe that the exposures we already have are producing major effects already on our health, and that 5G will be vastly worse than anything that we are already exposed to.
At least 3 expert medical groups have linked certain kinds of electromagnetic fields, or EMFs, to cancer, particularly childhood leukemia. The U.S. National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, a working group under the World Health Organization, and a European scientific committee, which studied cell phones in particular. Paul says there's more to worry about.
What's been shown is you get depression, I can't sleep, I'm tired all the time, I'm depressed, I've got headaches, I can't concentrate, I'm anxious, all the things that everybody complains about now, we know are caused by EMF exposures. And not just one type, but multiple types of EMF exposures.
Stop 5G! We want safe technology! The concerns are shared by citizens and scientists around the world.
These antennas are being installed without our permission, without any warning at all. Many of us do not want to be guinea pigs in this experiment, but we apparently have no say in the matter.